Welcome everyone. What if the world's most powerful country just fought a war and still couldn't force a surrender? Because this isn't just about Iran or the US. This is about oil prices, global stability, and whether wars today can even be won. And to break this down, not emotionally, but strategically, I am joined by Dr. Adityanji, President of the Council for Strategic Affairs, one of the few voices that actually predicted that Iran wouldn't collapse. So, Dr. Adityanji, my first question to you is controlling the strait more powerful than winning on the battlefield? What do you say?
It looks like that Iran's strategic control of traffic, whether of large containers or merchant ships, through the Strait of Hormuz, has brought the United States to a situation that it wanted negotiations, ceasefires, despite destroying
Yeah.
90% of military capability of Iran. That includes not just the missiles, the drone production facilities, their navy. Pretty much all the ships were destroyed. The the mine laying ships were destroyed,
Mhm.
and their air force was antique, and that was totally destroyed.
Mhm.
So you had very heavy destruction, decapitation of the leadership. The supreme leader was killed. 49 other leaders were killed in the same strike. After that, Ali Larjani was killed. Number of, people from the ruling establishment in the Islamic regime were killed. And yet, United States was not able to do regime change. United States was not able to bring the Islamic Republic of Iran to its knees because of their successful leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Uh, it created an economic havoc for the entire world. The Brent crude oil prices jumped from $72 per barrel to, at one point in time, 115, $120 per barrel. And when that happens, even the Texas crude oil prices go up all over the world. There are secondary consequences. You know, the businesses have to be shut down. The fertilizer prices go up. The food item prices go up. So effectively, the entire global economy, especially of some Asian countries' economy, was severely affected. Countries like Philippines, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and major difficulty. And
Mhm.
even China, which gets 80% of its Iranian crude from Strait of Hormuz, and Japan, which gets around 90% of its oil supplies from Strait of Hormuz, has been affected. So effectively, this simple choking the Strait of Hormuz has shown the leverage Islamic Republic of regime has exercised. And although they have lost militarily,
Mhm.
but this is a strategic win. And of course, you know about these, peace talks in Islamabad.
Mhm.
It's very interesting. First is the choice of Islamabad and using Pakistan as an interlocutor. And
Yeah.
people are commenting on that. In fact, John Bolton said, he was a former national security advisor, that choosing Pakistan as a mediator is like, choosing a pickpocket for mediation in a theft case.
Mhm.
So that is there, but Pakistan has a history of being a client state of United States since its inception, and
Mhm.
people tend to forget. It was Pakistan in 1971 July that facilitated a trip, for the first trip by Henry Kissinger, to communist China. Apparently he was in a place called Murray, and they said that he developed tropical diarrhea, so he is out of commission for 2 days. And those 2 days he was flown to China and had a meeting with Chow and Lai that led to facilitation of good relations between United States under Nixon administration and Communist China with Chao En-lai and Mao Zedong. So Pakistan has a history of working for something for United States. So yes, that was chosen. But after 21 hours of talks, in which Iranian delegation actually brought 71 people, and they apparently the reports I've read that they brought a lot of material, technical material. Their Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Galibaf,
Mhm.
and the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi were there, and U.S. somehow sent J.D. Vance, who was along with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were earlier involved in negotiations prior to February 28th that were being facilitated by Oman, and Iranians didn't trust them because these people are real estate developers. Their issue was how to make money in post war negotiations and reconstruction. So Iranians had expressed some sort of preference for J.D. Vance, who had opposed the war initially, but as president's loyal cabinet member and deputy, he is all the way in now since the decision was taken. But these talks did not yield the desired results. And it was not expected that Iran will capitulate just in 21 hours when this has been a simmering problem. And people again forget the JCPOA that was negotiated between Obama administration and Islamic regime in Iran, it took 2.5 years to negotiate, and it had put lot of controls on Iranian nuclear program, IAEA inspection, capping of enrichment, uranium enrichment to 20%. And Trump walked away from that under pressure from Benjamin Netanyahu, and you are seeing the results. So ultimately, talks have failed. What United States will do is not very clear. They did send two destroyers in the Strait of Hormuz. They claim that they are ensuring safe passage. Iran claimed that these two ships were given a warning that they need to move away, and within 30 minutes they moved away because Iran fired a drone. But United States is claiming that they are in the process of providing safe passage to oil containers, very large crude containers and merchant ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, there's a parallel attempt by European powers led by Britain and France. They have created a 35 country coalition that will help with keeping Strait of Hormuz quote unquote safe. How safe that would be, we do not know. So that is where we are. And United States is saying now that any container ship that pays the toll money to Iran will not be allowed to pass. So they have put their own chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. So
Yeah.
there's an Iranian blockade and there's a US blockade now that those vessels or those merchant ships that pay toll to Iran, and
Mm.
Iran is charging that actually in cryptocurrency, not in dollars or yuans. If they pay toll, they will not be allowed to move. So we are having a very interesting situation in Strait of Hormuz.
So in this case, any tanker can be attacked by the US or the Iran. So the world is going to pay the price.
Of course, if you have two sides that are so belligerent, so intransigent, then yes, rest of the world will pay price because, I mean, dealing with a blockade with a counter blockade, how rational is that? Because if your aim is to
Mhm.
bring down the world oil prices, insurance companies are not going to insure anything for these are secondary insurances,
Yeah.
for passage through the Strait of Hormuz. So the insurance clubs, protection and indemnity clubs that work as non-profits, they are not going to insure any boat or any vessel passing through Strait of Hormuz if you have two countries that have blockade and counter blockade. It's a kind of war situation in Strait of Hormuz. So It's kind of funny that we are at this stage, but it's an unpredictable situation. And although there are still almost 10 days
Mhm.
in which this interim ceasefire will end, hopefully both the parties may reconvene again. We don't know. You
Mhm.
know, initially the disagreement is only on two issues, which is Strait of Hormuz and nuclear options,
Mhm.
because Iran is not willing to bend down on their so-called quote unquote right to
Mhm.
do uranium enrichment for civilian purposes.
Mhm.
So let's see what Trump administration does. Right now, they are saying that we will enforce a blockade in Strait of Hormuz
Mhm.
by our own naval assets. We have ships there that are loaded with ammunition. We have three aircraft carriers in the vicinity. We have destroyers. We have minesweepers that will sweep the mines of Strait of Hormuz. They have an alternative channel which is closer to Oman rather than to Iran. What Iran will do, that is anybody's guess.
So, this actually the discussion went for 21 hours. This
Yeah.
was the first direct talks nearly in 5 decades, and
Mhm.
then suddenly nothing. The US delegation left empty-handed. So, what exactly happened inside those 21 hours that made the deal impossible?
See, you had very ambitious hopes that this 50 years of acrimony will dissipate in like 21 hours. I think that is diplomatically naive. I won't use the word foolish, I will say diplomatically naive. I already mentioned to you the previous instance, it took 2.5 years. Prior to that, European countries, EU4, were negotiating with Iran, and then they got enlarged into six party talks and JCPOA that was negotiated. And that was a reasonable containment of Iran's nuclear program because it was under IAEA supervision. There was monitoring going on, US was party to it. And yes, other aspects of Iran's military machine were not contained, but that was not the goal. If your goal is to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear power, don't bring other issues into that discussion, which Israel was bringing that, oh, it does not contain their ballistic missiles program. So the world lost an opportunity because at that time, the former and now assassinated supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei had issued a fatwa that nuclear weapons are against humanity. Iran will never develop nuclear weapons. Now, with his assassination, that fatwa is gone, and the successor Khamenei is supposed to be more hardliner. He is not. He has not renewed that fatwa, so you have very unpredictable situation.
Hmm.
And Iran was not willing to negotiate their quote unquote right to enrich uranium for civilian purposes. That was a, I mean, they may have considered, transferring the material to Russia or some other country or even United States. But as far as know-how and technology is concerned, they were not willing to give that up.
Hmm.
So that was one reason, and the control and sovereignty over Strait of Hormuz was the second issue on which the talks bogged down. I think a better approach may have been that okay, they have 10 points, we have 15 points. Let's see what are the points we agree on. So let's catch the low hanging fruit. Let's pluck the low hanging fruit. So we have agreement on 4 points. Let's agree on that. We shall meet again in a week's time, discuss other things. So have a serial set of meetings in which you have confidence building measures.
Right.
US is a superpower,
Mhm.
US is a hyperpower, and US has decimated their military machine. They say that we cannot trust United States. That's why they wanted JD Vance. They didn't want Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who were negotiating with them. And Omani foreign minister said on a Friday evening before the attack on February 28th
Hmm.
that yes, talks have gone very progressively, very positive. I am sure when we meet on Monday, there will be an agreement. And yet there was a surprise that on Saturday night, there was bombardment of Iran by both Israel and so Israelis. have been very unhappy about it. And that is again a sore point because continued Israeli attacks on southern Lebanon was not appreciated because initially that was part of 10-point program,
mm,
10-point proposal of Iran. So there could have been a different way of handling this situation.
mm,
We have a predicament that Bibi Netanyahu has more hold on Donald Trump. And apparently there was a telephone call. Initially, Trump said that yes, everything is legitimate, everything is workable. And the moment Netanyahu called him, he said, no, Lebanon was never included. There were probably different drafts given. So you are having another entity that is not sitting on the table but is influencing the one person who can make the final decision, that is Donald Trump. So the hold of Israeli lobby or hold of Benjamin Netanyahu on Trump probably also contributed to failure of these talks. In these kind of talks, when parties are having very adversarial strengths, and you had a war, you decimated their country, you threatened to annihilate their entire civilization. How will they trust you if you don't give them something in return? Ideal thing would have been to engage them, continue to engage them point by point.
yeah.
The least contentious issues could have been solved. Yes, we have some improvement, some positive thing. There is reward, reinforcement, and that would act as inducement to change behavior diplomatically and strategically for country like Iran, which is a very proud country. That country is not going to, quote unquote, obey to the dictats of the superpower. You have seen the behavior.
So we saw the Israel strikes first, then the US joins. Iran's leadership wiped out on day one.
Hmm.
Any normal country collapses here. Why didn't Iran collapse when its top leadership was eliminated?
So, top leadership was prepared for this eventuality. When you do threat analysis, threat perception, uh, simulation of scenarios, all those kind of things, I'm pretty sure that Iranian military machine went through all these things. The other thing you need to realize that Ayatollah Khamenei was 86 years old. He was suffering from cancer. And I'm pretty sure he had in place a succession plan in the event that he died a natural death. So they were prepared for that. The other thing was that they had decentralized the IRGC, Revolutionary Guard Corps, had decentralized their leadership, knowing that there will be decapitation of leadership. So when there is decapitation of leadership, who will take charge? You appoint a second leader, that gets killed, assassinated. That starts a chain reaction. So they decentralize, saying that 31 provinces in Iran will have a separate command under a local commander. And they are given free hand to take whatever military actions they deem necessary in case of decapitation of the political power. So the Islamic regime had done some thinking. You may not agree with their philosophy, the human rights record, that's a totally different thing.
Mhm,
But on a strategic angle, in
mhm.
an asymmetric situation when they didn't have any resources, they've been denied, starved of technology, you know, financial sanctions, with whatever little they had a very good alternative plan. And that's why they were able to survive. And you saw this day that after 38 days of war, and after threatening to annihilate the Iranian civilization and country, United States was forced to declare an interim ceasefire using the face-saving device of Islamabad. In fact, the draft of announcement was dictated to Shahbaz Sharif, and he put on the Twitter saying draft for the Prime Minister of Pakistan.
Mm,
So it was kind of, the anatomy
Mhm.
gesture to use Pakistan because they will do whatever United States wanted them to do.
Mhm.
So Iranian regime had done their homework assignment and they were prepared for this. So despite having all those losses, they are still standing.
So, is this decentralized model the future of warfare?
Well, you cannot universalize it. Iranians call it the Mosaic Doctrine. And at least in this theater, Mosaic Doctrine has been successful. And Iran learned it from the 2 years war that was going on in Gaza, Israel versus Hamas. That if you analyze what was happening in Gaza, Israel killed pretty much all the top leadership of Hamas, but Hamas did not capitulate. It took 2 years, just a small strip, 10 miles wide, 20 miles long of Gaza, for Israel to decimate the Hamas military capability. 2 years. So that was testing of the Mosaic doctrine because, if you have each commander responsible to itself for military action,
Mhm.
yes, they will do whatever little damage they can do. It can be death by 1,000 cuts, and
Mhm.
even a sleeping giant can be, hurt by 1,000 cuts. So, at least in this theater, Iran has demonstrated that the Mosaic doctrine or decentralization of military leadership can work. But will it happen in every war? No, each war is different, each context is different, geography is different, the players are different. So, to make a universal statement that, that will be the future of war, no, that's not true. It's a very particular geography.
So we have seen there have been thousands of strikes even after losing most launch system in Iran. So how did Iran rebuild so fast under constant attack?
So, this interim period, it is giving a gap to both the parties to replenish. Trump
Mhm.
has already said that we are, replenishing our ammunition, our weapon systems are being loaded because they had run short of interceptors
Mhm.
and they had, finished all their ammunition. Apparently, Iran had a lot of reserve capacity that you need to know. Iran was also getting supplies from possibly Russia and China. They don't have to go through the sea route, they can get through the land route or through Caspian Sea on the north, and possibly again, from North Korea. uh, Iran has its own capability. I don't know how many factories you destroyed, but your factories, if they are underground, under the mountains, in the northern mountains, it is very difficult to destroy each and every production facility. And that is what Iranians are saying, that you may have intelligence, but you don't have full intelligence. You don't understand our resolve. In fact, there's one particular weapon the Iranians have not used so far. And
Right.
it's a very low cost weapon.
Okay.
And it is uncrewed surface vehicles. These are like drone boats. They have not used so far. Yes, Iranian Navy ships have been all decimated, destroyed, but they have tunnels full of these drone boats in case of hot war in Strait of Hormuz.
Hmm.
And these boats are not very expensive, maybe 30, 40,000 US dollars. So you have a, $500 million ship. And it gets attacked by a drone boat.
Hmm.
You do the risk, calculation. What is more effective? Iranians have not used the drone boats as yet.
So I was coming to just the economics of war, coming to the drone economics. A $20,000 drone versus a $5 million interceptor. Is this where the US actually started losing the economic war?
Of course, that is true. And when you say 25,000 or $30,000 worth of price of one drone and interceptor is 4 or 5 million, you need more than one interceptor
Yeah.
to bring down a drone
Mm,
because some of them were decoy drones
mhm,
just to fool the adversary. So you were wasting your decoy drone, your interceptors on decoy drones. So yes, economically it has hurt United States. The they asked $50 billion. Pentagon asked $50 billion extra money, and then $200 billion. And now for the next year's budget, Trump administration is asking for $1.5 trillion of defense budget,
mm,
basically to offset all the losses of the ammunition
mhm,
in this 38-day long war.
mm,
And imagine that two of their aircraft carriers had to move away from the theater for one reason or the other, but they are related to the war for USS Abraham Lincoln
mm,
and USS Gerald Ford.
mm,
One because apparently there was a 30-hour long fire in the laundry room. Is not
mm,
sure whether that was done by internal sabotage of the sailors on that particular aircraft carrier or it was done by a missile attack by Iran. Iran claims they did a missile attack. And since nobody wants to share openly and people are under threat of prosecution, even journalists who have leaked information
mm.
and active duty soldiers, they are under threat of court martial. Nobody is leaking from either side what actually happened. So you have a US, which is a superpower, which has effectively destroyed Iran's military machine to a great extent, yet it is feeling the economic pain, and that is reflecting in the political discourse.
Mm.
Even the die-hard MAGA supporter journalists like, let me name a few, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owen, they are all now against this war. They said this is totally in contradiction to pre election results. Trump's promises that we will focus on America first, we will not waste our resources, economic resources, and our military resources on foreign wars. And irony is that Iran did not attack United States. It's the United States that attacked Iran.
Yeah.
So you're having a lot of domestic repercussions of this war and
Mhm,
possibly loss of Republican Party in the midterm elections. So
mhm.
yes, economically it has affected United States to a great extent, but they are not going to admit, like any superpower, they are going to keep on bluffing that idea is to, bully Islamic regime in Iran to submission. And I think what has happened that the Islamic regime has called America out. Okay, you do whatever you want. We are not going to sign on the dotted line, even after 21 hours of negotiations. That these are our, you know, red lines. We are not going to cross them.
So coming to the proxy war, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, the battlefield wasn't one place. It was everywhere. So did Iran turn geography into its biggest weapon?
Well, Iran, the West Asia is a very complicated and layered area, theater. There are multiple issues. Uh, yes, majority of the Arab countries are aligned with the United States. Okay. GCC country, Cooperation Council countries are all have bases given to United States. But Iran has its own allies, and there seems to be a Sunni versus Shia divide. So Iran is a Shia country. Now, next to Iran currently is Iraq. Iraq is an Arab country, but Iraq is a Shia country. Similarly, the current Houthi regime in Yemen is supported by Iran and they are beholden to Iran for their success against the Saudi Arabia. Similarly, the non-state actors, which are the proxy warriors for Iran, whether it is Hezbollah, whether it is Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and such outfits, have been supported by Iran. So Iran has its own network of non-state actors, whether they are sitting in Yemen or Lebanon or anywhere else for that matter in Iraq uh, or in Syria. Iran has extraterritorial influence. Let's be very clear, Iran is a regional middle level power. Now, it is true that Israel infiltrated their power structure to get human intelligence and was successful in decapitating all these senior military leadership. Yet, Iran has some support. And yes, the war that is going on in South Lebanon, and later on, the attacks by Houthis that started much later, that is Iran's support in the region by proxies.
So, looking at this negotiation, uh, Iran survives and forces a ceasefire and walks into talks not as a loser but as an equal. So, you see, the Iran was negotiating from a strength.
Iran was negotiating from strategic leverage position. Despite being smaller, much more diminished militarily, having suffered heavy losses. Militarily, Iran has lost, there's no doubt about it. But strategically, they've won because they have affected the world economy and US economy.
Okay.
So it depends how you define the victory. So, yes, they came into these talks from a position of leverage, of strategic strength. A, that they are still standing. B, they have alternative mechanism by which they are surviving. C, they are inflicting maximum cost, economic cost to United States and rest of the world by controlling Strait of Hormuz and making it a non-negotiable point.
So, looking at the other side, even the US and Israel weren't even aligned. One side wants de-escalation and the other keeps striking Lebanon. Does this internal split weaken the US position?
Look, it's not like diametric opposition. They may not agree on 15% or 20% of the issues, but rest 80% they agree. That's why they went in war together. If you read the Maggie Haberman article in New York Times, which was in sort of, open access mode, it gave, blow by blow account of what happened on February 11th when Netanyahu came to Washington, D.C. and sat in the Situation Room along with Trump and his team and made a presentation. And despite a lot of reservation by a number of participants there, including J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and possibly even uh, General Raisin Kane, about Netanyahu's proposals, Trump decided to go ahead. So, on one hand, you have one leader having disproportionate influence on another leader that is driving this war because ultimately decision was by Trump. But you have to understand the objectives of both the countries are not the same. And even now, when the interim ceasefire was declared, Netanyahu was not happy. He continued to attack Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon because Netanyahu's agenda is greater Israel. He wants to give strategic depth to Israel by extending Israeli territory. And even 2 days into this ceasefire, he was able to convince Trump to say that no, Lebanon was not included. Hostilities in Lebanon were not included. So, yes, I mean, Israel is basically a strong junior ally of United States,
We have
but
less than a
Israel.
minute. We have less than a minute left. So please finish.
So, yes, they have different aims and objectives. Sometimes they are in harmony, other times they are not in harmony.
So thank you, folks. That was all for today. If you have any question on your mind, please share with us. We'll be answering your question. Thank you, Dr. Adityanji. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. We remain in a situation of unpredictability,
Yeah.
and that will manifest.